By refusing to surrender, Rome had in essence thrown away the old rule book.
He's just inflicted these appalling defeats on the Romans, the sort of things that would have broken the back of any other kingdom or nation around at the time. They would have rolled over, given in, and said, right, it's a fair cop, Gov, we're beaten. It's over.
Hannibal had completely misjudged the mindset of the Romans. This was his critical mistake.
The Romans are fighting a life or death struggle. That's how they see things. That's how they think. It's a completely different mindset to Hannibal. It's something he never really understands. As far as the Romans are concerned, there can only be one winner from this struggle. Either Rome herself will cease to exist, or Carthage will.
This was a new way to think. This was the Roman way. From Rome's perspective, having Hannibal in their backyard was plain humiliating and needed putting to rights.
Rome is beaten down, it's on its knees, but it doesn't give in. This is someone it knows has nearly destroyed the Republic, and the Romans are not going to forgive this, and they're not going to forget this.
Very cleverly, they decide that the best way to fight Hannibal is not to fight him at all. So for the next 14 years, they leave him to traipse around the Italian countryside, vainly trying to goad the Romans into a fight. But they refuse to be drawn into another pitched battle.
The Romans are denying Hannibal his greatest strength. He's got this terrific army. He's the most gifted tactical commander that the world has seen, and Hannibal can't use those advantages anymore unless the Romans actually offer their armies up for destruction.
By refusing to be drawn into battle, the Romans had found Hannibal's Achilles' heel. His mercenary army was fine when fighting and winning battles, but no battles means new mercenaries become less inclined to join his army, and his core army gets weaker by the month.
Hannibal's army gradually declines in size and in quality as the war goes on. The Roman armies keep on improving, so the advantage he has over them narrows. From the very start of the war, it gets less and less until it disappears altogether.
The biggest blow to Hannibal, however, was the defection of his elite cavalry, the Numidians, just before the battle that would decide the outcome of the war between Rome and Carthage. And commanding the Roman army at that battle was Hannibal's nemesis. He was Scipio Africanus. He and his father had been facing Hannibal ever since he first arrived on Roman soil.
Scipio is present the first time Hannibal defeats a small Roman force. He's present at Cannae. He may have been there at some of the other battles as well. He's seen the greatest army Rome has ever put in the field cut to ribbons by Hannibal's smaller force. So Scipio realizes that this opponent is not one that we can beat easily.
Having first-hand experience, he was fairly intimate with Hannibal's tactics. Scipio decided that the only way to defeat Hannibal was to mimic those tactics. He took the fight to Africa and threatened Carthage itself, just as Hannibal had done to Rome. Hannibal was recalled from Italy to defend his home city. 16 years after Hannibal started the war, he and Scipio faced each other on the plains of Zama.
Scipio does exactly what Hannibal has been doing to a long succession of Roman generals. And when Scipio comes up against the other Carthaginians, he outwits them and defeats them with almost disdainful ease, in the same sort of way that Hannibal had done things to the Romans in the early years of his campaigns in Italy. So Scipio is very ready for the confrontation with Hannibal. He's learnt from the master, and then it's just a question of whether or not he can actually beat Hannibal himself. But he's got the talent to do it, he's also got the army to do it.
At the Battle of Zama, Hannibal's army lined up with a fresh supply of some 80 war elephants in front of his massed infantry and cavalry. Hannibal charged his elephants in an attempt to break the Roman lines. And it's now that he learns about the weakness of his terror weapon firsthand.
Scipio has trained his army to deal with elephants in a very effective way. So Scipio at Zama gets his men to open lanes in the ranks of the army, so that the elephants simply go for the least line of resistance. They head through the gaps and head off behind the Roman army, and there they're killed, disposed of, or just get lost on their own.
Worse still, some of his elephants became a liability as they turned and charged Hannibal's own men, causing mass panic. Then, using one of Hannibal's own trademark tactics, Scipio's cavalry, having driven off Hannibal's own cavalry, returned to attack Hannibal from the rear. The pupil had eclipsed the master, and with that, the Second Punic War drew to a close. The bitter twist to Hannibal's story is that although he set out to defeat Rome, the threat he posed forced her to become bigger, better, and badder than ever before. Hannibal had created a monster, a Rome bent on destruction, and a Rome who wouldn't easily forgive or forget what Hannibal had almost done. Hannibal escaped from Zama, but as long as he lived, Rome couldn't rest. Eventually, rather than die at the hands of the Romans, he committed suicide 19 years later. The last obstacle to a complete Roman victory had been removed, and in a third and final Punic War, Rome finally attacks the city of Carthage itself.
So, what happens is this, and to start with they lay siege to it and try and starve them out, and then eventually they storm the city, and they slowly but surely move up the hill, setting fire to all the tall buildings around them. And you'd have thought that might be the end of it, but it's not, because then what the Romans do is very carefully basically destroy the citadel itself, and eventually what you're going to get is they actually cut the whole top of the hill away, just slice it away. And the idea of that is to remove any trace of Carthage, to actually consign Carthage to oblivion. And what that's about is it teaches everybody else what the worst case scenario is, that could be you. And once you've done it, then nobody ever forgets. Rome at last is really ready to become the sort of Mediterranean superpower.
Hannibal's fight with Rome lasted a total of 17 years. While attempting to gain recognition and glory for Carthage, he inadvertently created a new kind of power.
The struggle between Rome and Carthage was inevitable in some shape or form. The Roman mindset doesn't really allow for peaceful coexistence with other nations.
In their worldview, there could only be a single dominant power, Rome. And Hannibal's role was pivotal.
Hannibal's often portrayed as Rome's worst nightmare. Actually, he's Carthage's worst nightmare, because he sows the seeds of its destruction.
Hannibal makes things happen in a different way. He also probably speeds up the process, completely unintentionally. He frightens the Romans so much that he makes them very ruthless, particularly in relation to Carthage, but also other nations. They start expanding very quickly after they've beaten Hannibal.
Hannibal was the powerful catalyst that propelled Rome from being a regional power with ambitions of greatness into the first imperialist superpower that shaped the world we live in today.